this session with them. First, I have Kevin Kern. Kevin is the Group Product Manager at QuickBooks Online and other new products with Intuit. So, Kevin, welcome today.
Thanks, Darren. Glad to be here.
My pleasure. Got your MBA from the University of Washington, too, huh?
That's right, yeah. Yeah, I
Wonderful.
spent about 20 years up in Seattle doing a whole bunch of stuff in a bunch of school.
That's great. Well, we're going to have some great discussion today about cloud and QBO and QBOA in particular, so that should be fun. And then we also have Woody Adams. Woody is a QuickBooks product consultant, so Woody had I had the pleasure of spending some time with Woody. He came to Indianapolis from one of our RootWorks events. So Woody, welcome today.
Thanks, Darren, and hello, Kevin, as well. Yeah, I enjoyed that show. That was wonderful meeting some of the members for your group. Also wanted to shout out that I also host a weekly radio program called Radio Free QuickBooks, and if you want to learn more about it, radiofreeqb.com. We have a Brad Smith interview tonight if you want to listen in or on podcast. But thanks, Darren, for having me.
Oh, awesome. That sounds like a lot of fun, Woody. Well, guys, like I said, we have a great, I think, a great hour to spend today. We're going to talk about a number of things, and so our objectives today really is to talk, and Kevin, you and I will probably spend the first half hour sort of going back and forth, and we'll bring Woody on a little bit later in the presentation. But we want to talk about sort of where's the cloud going, how can firms get there, what's the right environment? I mean, right now there's a lot of discussion about SaaS and hosted, and so what is the right environment for them to be in? So apologize, guys, my phone's ringing in the background. Also, how important is mobile? You know, I keep hearing more about mobile all the time. How important is mobile to our clients today? And then lastly, we want to sort of wrap up talking about QuickBooks Online Accountant and do a bit of an overview of that. So does that sound okay today, guys?
Yeah, sounds great.
Great. Well, Kevin, let's you and I get started here and talk about just a little bit of terminology, because I think people get a little confused sometimes about this concept of the cloud. What is SaaS, and then sort of what is hosted. So if you were to sort of give your definition of those three terms, what would it be?
Sure. Well, yeah, this is a confusing topic, and if you Google it, you'll find many, many different answers here. But I define software as a service or any cloud-based solution as a service that's truly hosted off-premise. So this is a case where the software is running on a web server somewhere else. The user doesn't have to manage it in any way. They don't have to do updates. The software is probably working for them, you know, in the case of online accounting, often downloading bank transactions and things while they're not working. And the way they access that software is often through a mobile device, through a web browser, or in some cases through a desktop client. And that's where things can get a little confusing. You know, a great example might be Outlook and Exchange. You know, you might be using a cloud-based email system, but accessing it through a desktop application. But all those things would be considered cloud accounting or cloud solutions. And you know, as you have on here, Salesforce.com is a great example of a true cloud solution, as is QuickBooks Online. On-premise solutions, that's the one we all know and love. QuickBooks Desktop is a great example of that. That means that you're actually installing software on your own server or on your own PC or Mac. And that doesn't mean that that software won't be connected to something. You know, for instance, QuickBooks Desktop does have the sync feature that allows you to push some of your data to the internet to connect to other applications. So on-premise solutions can be connected as well, but because they're not actually running on a cloud-based server, they're not considered cloud solutions. And then finally, hosted solutions. All you're doing there is taking existing desktop software and running it on a separate machine that's in somebody's data center, you know, somewhere in the world. And then you're simply logging onto that machine and using that software. And so the user experience is very similar to having it on premise, but you get a few advantages of having somebody else do your backups for you, being able to log in from anywhere in the world, etc.
So the lines here sometimes get fairly blurry for firms from my from the people I talk to, Kevin, because I could be running QuickBooks on my desktop and use what is becoming more commonly referred to as connected services and connect out to maybe my mobile device. Even though I'm on an on-premise solution on my desktop, I could connect out to the web and to a lot of other things and devices. Is that a fair assessment?
That's true. Yeah, and the line can get blurry. I really encourage people to think about what their needs are and how these various solutions fit their needs, not so much what technology do they need.
So there's this concept that gets discussed, I think, quite a bit in the accounting circles is that hosted, and I got to tell you, Kevin, I'm a pretty big advocate of hosted right now because it's and we'll talk a little bit more about this because it's a low hurdle for a lot of my clients to get over just to take their desktop QuickBooks and move it out in the clouds, and we'll talk about the advantage of that. Um, but some people consider that transitional technology. Any thoughts around that?
Well, yeah, it's a tricky topic, and I'm certainly a fan of hosting myself. If you're in a situation right now where you're using an on-premise solution, actually installing QuickBooks Desktop on your own machines, going to a hosted solution has huge advantages over that. There's a few things it doesn't do, however. Um, the biggest one is related to downloading transactions from banks. We call it downloaded transactions in QBO. Other software might call it bank feeds or online banking. There's a lot of different terms for it. But with a true SaaS solution, you get that magic of zero data entry where transactions are just flowing right into your accounting solution, even when you're not using it. So it really brings a big data entry benefit to the customer that you just can't do with any sort of on-premise or hosted solution.
I think Mint.com, which I should have put up underneath SaaS here, and I neglected to do so. But Mint.com was really sort of an early adopter of that automatic zero data entry, software gets smarter sort of mentality, don't you think?
That's absolutely true. Yeah, I was a very early adopter of Mint.com. It was the first solution for my personal finances that required so little time and gave me so much benefit that it was a no-brainer to try it. And obviously we've leveraged a lot of the technology from Mint.com into QuickBooks Online as well.
So we'll get a chance to see a little bit more of that here in just a bit. So, we just laid out some terminology, Kevin. I'd like to talk just a little bit about, where do you see the cloud going at this point? In my firm, Kevin, and you and I have talked a few times about this, I find huge value in having collaborative access to my client's data and vice versa in real time all the time. That's what I think makes my firm really effective and makes us significantly more profitable. It's this idea of not only having my office everywhere, but also having access to my client's information everywhere. Makes sense? Obviously that makes sense to you. You're running QuickBooks Online, but
You're speaking my language, Darren.
right. But you guys have to have. Kind of talk through this slide, if you will, a little bit, Kevin. We talked a little bit about the cloud, and then let's just talk a little bit about virtualized computing. But where do you see? Put yourself in the shoes of an accounting firm. Where do you see this moving from an accounting firm's perspective?
Yeah, I think we've just taken the first little baby step into what we can do with the cloud at this point. As you mentioned, it gives you that consistent set of data that both you and your clients are accessing in real time, which gives you huge advantages. You don't need to pass files around. You can be a very active participant in your client's accounting life cycle without having to do a lot of work to make that happen. That's a huge benefit. The other baby step we've taken is with the downloaded transactions. We're able to connect to your banks and pull in data, but I see that going much, much broader than that. I imagine a world where all of your data is flowing in automatically, that you don't think about importing data or typing in data. Your POS is connected, your contacts are connected, your CRM's connected, everything you're doing is connected. And we're that central hub that's making sense of all this crazy information coming in, teasing it out, figuring out where it goes, and helping you manage this flow of data. So I see the role of software changing from being a very workflow focused software where you're typing things in and managing processes to managing all these different streams of data coming in and making sense of them.
You know, I think you're right on point with that, Kevin. I recently had experienced a new solution. I don't know if you've heard of this one yet or not. It's called File This. And I don't want to spend a lot of time on that solution in particular. It's out in San Francisco. But the concept is this. It's, you know, I would go in there and they're sort of a gateway. So you think about, I have a bank statement, let's say at chase.com, and I might have a Fidelity statement at fidelity.com, and maybe my insurance is with Anthem, and I get my EOB statements at Anthem. What this type of solution does, and I just think it's, you know, we're in the infancy of this. It goes and instead of me having to go log into all those places and grab those statements, when those statements are available, the data appears in let's say my Dropbox or maybe on a dashboard somewhere, and on that data is coming to me, and then I'm just managing the inflows of data, which really completely supports what you just said, don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, that sounds like a great example of a transitional solution to some degree, in that it's still based in this world of bank statements and things coming, you know, which as the data starts to flow more real time, who knows if we'll really see a traditional bank statement that you'd want to file away. You know what I mean?
Great point.
Yeah.
So if you put your crystal ball hat on a minute, where do you see us? I mean, how fast is this evolving in let's say 5 years?
You know, I think we're right at that tipping point at this point. You know, you look at some of the basic building blocks are in place right now. You know, QuickBooks Online is able to connect to 12,500 financial institutions, and we're going to have another 5,500 on there in the next couple of weeks. And we've got our platform in place. And so you start to picture all those different apps I talked about, everything from mail to CRM to POS, you name it, connecting into that system and that becoming the hub of data. So I think this could go a lot faster than some people have predicted, just given that the building blocks are in place, and to a large extent it's up to us and our partners to rapidly flush that story out and make that dream come to reality.
You know, I believe you're right. I do believe that we are at a tipping point. You know, I was out a couple of months ago when I saw you, Kevin, and I was talking to Brad Smith, the CEO at Intuit, doing an interview for CPA Practice Advisor. And Brad told me two, I thought, really interesting pieces of information. One, the amount of engineering staff that has been moved to QBO. So the commitment that Intuit was making to that platform. And two, the growth of the number of users over the last 12 months was a significant number. It was at least 3 times. So both of those things tell me that there's a lot happening in this space really quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. We're growing fast. We're adding a new user every minute right now. We're already at 1.3 million users worldwide. Yeah, I couldn't agree with Brad more. And of course, as he said, we're investing heavily, not just in QuickBooks Online, but in the entire small business cloud story that includes payments and payroll and accounting features and all that good stuff. So it's a huge investment at this point, and it makes sense, you know, given that 62% of Intuit's revenue comes from online services, and so you know we are largely a SaaS company at this point. And with that transition revenue-wise comes a transition in terms of investment as well.
Well, as we mentioned, you know, there's lots of value to being in the cloud. We talked about all these, you know, the backups. I mean, if you're in New York or New Jersey right now, you know, it's got to be a tough environment to function if you had servers on premise and you had QuickBooks loaded on your desktop. So we just look at those disasters that seem to be happening all over the place and think, you know, we've got to start thinking about running some of this stuff in data centers and having access from multiple locations, things like that. So the question is, if we see the value in that, and I think most people are starting to see the value in that in all parts of their life, Kevin. what's the best way to get there? And we started out by talking a little bit about SaaS and hosted accounting solutions and a little bit of the difference. But if I look at what's in this for my firm, I will just kind of attest to this, Kevin. Our efficiency when we can collaborate with a client in real time, whether it's hosted QuickBooks or QuickBooks Online, goes through the roof. My staff doesn't even want to work in a solution at this point that is not collaborative. It's easy and quick to implement. I can have a QBO client or even a hosted QuickBooks client up and going, in really a matter of minutes. And then the other key part, and I think you sort of hit on this, Kevin, this idea of keying transactions in. There's not a lot of value typically seen in keying transactions in, but there's a lot of value created in driving strategic value, which is being that collaborative support person from a firm's perspective to their clients. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's what I see is in it for my firm to moving to this sort of model. So if I look at that and I say, well, which is the better way to go? And you and I had this discussion, I don't know, a week or so ago, Kevin. Should I take and move my QuickBooks desktop clients to a hosted model, which I've been doing for, I think, 6 years, Kevin. I have all my clients at least in a hosted model and many today in a QBO model, but 100% of them are in a collaborative model. So if we just talk a minute about the hosted model, again, there's a low barrier to entry. It's you can just move your QuickBooks client to a hosting center, and you're really, once you have a user login, you're off and running. And you can certainly work in a multi-user access. And with QuickBooks new attach feature, you can be paperless up there. I guess it's not new, but with the QuickBooks attach feature, it can be paperless. So there's a lot of value to that. Pretty easy to do, and clients, there's low change for a client. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely.
There's a cost. There's a hosting cost associated with that. There is a, you still have to manage upgrades. So Enterprise 13, QuickBooks 2013 is just hitting everybody's desktops at this point. So there's a process there, keeping people on versions, keeping people on the current release, all that kind of stuff. But again, we do have the collaborative data. Did I state that fairly fair?
Yeah, I think that's accurate. It is. I like your point about, hey, if you've spent years training somebody on QuickBooks Desktop, and all you need to get them to is a collaborative environment. You don't need the benefits of downloaded transactions and whatnot. Then yeah, that can be a way to avoid a lot of retraining, but still get some of the benefits of being online.
Yeah. But as you and I talked, and you articulated quite nicely to me, really all my new clients, certainly my younger clients, I ought to be really thinking about a SaaS model. I ought to be thinking about more the QuickBooks Online, and kind of talk about that if you would, Kevin.
Sure. Yeah. And I'm heavily biased here, being a QuickBooks Online guy myself, but I do believe that if you've got a new user coming in, somebody that's just setting up their books with you for the first time, it's a no-brainer to start with online. And a couple of reasons. One is this is the future. And if you want to avoid retraining and moving somebody to a different solution in the next few years, might as well get them on the future today. But also, when you're starting out with somebody new and you have that opportunity to train them up front, I'll show you the downloaded transactions feature in a few minutes. But I can't imagine why somebody would want to start a new client in a situation where they're going to have to do all the data entry. You want to get them started on a solution that's going to reduce that data entry, reduce those errors, and allow you to serve them much more efficiently.
So, Kevin, I just want to hit on one point with that. From an accounting firm's perspective, if you look back, gosh, 15 years in an accounting firm, the way accountants made money and bookkeepers was clients may have brought their canceled checks in or their receipts, and we keyed those things in places. We either paid the bills or we just keyed them in what used to be called write-up software to produce financial statements. So fairly low value work, and if we're billing by the hour, then we might as well use up as much time as possible. I know that doesn't sound very appropriate, but that's what was the purpose of being more efficient, right? If you're billing by the hour. In this world where we're using technology to do a lot of the lifting for us, I think firms have to start thinking about being in value billing models. So when you talk about leveraging technology and inflows of transactions and all that kind of stuff, I mean, accountants have to start charging for value and not for keying transactions in. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree. And you know, I do believe that especially this younger generation of entrepreneurs, they expect things to be connected. They expect things like their bank data to be automatically downloaded into a solution. They don't, it's just going to have an allergic reaction for them to think of having to pay somebody to key enter data for them. And so when they come to an accountant, I do believe they're going to be looking for somebody to help them navigate how to run their business and really looking for insights and how to get set up properly, not so much somebody to key in the data. Now that said, you know, there will be a call for some of those basic services until the end of time, you know, because people
Right.
are lazy and they need help, and you know, you're still going to see those people. I just think you're going to see a lot less of them.
So we have this marketplace today, Kevin, that, and tell me if I'm wrong, but I think Intuit owns probably 90+% of the small business um, clients or desktops in America. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that's roughly fair. Yeah.
Okay. So we have an awful lot of accountants who are, used to using QuickBooks in a very desktop backup, give me a backup sort of mindset. We've been trying to move them to more of a hosted model. And I guess I'm only stating some obvious numbers in asking the question, what is the best way, if you're starting a firm today, Kevin, what's the best way for us to move these things forward within our client base? So we've got our legacy client base, we've got our potential new client base, then we've got all these young people that are starting new businesses. What's the best way to sort of move your firm forward, given the marketplace as we see it today?
You know, as you and I were talking about the other day, Darren, I don't think there's any one size fits all answer here. I've seen all types. I've seen people that are sort of baby stepping into the cloud, and I think that's a totally legitimate strategy to say, hey, I'm going to take a couple of my simpler clients that are signing up for the first time, and I'm going to start them out on QBO and see how that goes. And what we've seen a lot with those folks is that once they get that fourth or fifth client onto QuickBooks Online and they start to see how the product scales and how efficiently they can serve those customers, how little data entry they're doing, then they start wanting to go cold turkey and move a lot of people onto QuickBooks Online. And so that's the other type we've seen. We've seen a number of firms that have just said, look, I'm convinced this is the future. It's going to be easier to rip the Band-Aid off now than in 10 years. I'm going to start moving all my clients over aggressively. There's a few things that QuickBooks Online doesn't do. That's fine. I'm going to use third-party apps to help me serve my entire client base. And so we've seen both ends of that spectrum with a number of folks in the accounting community.
As I show on the slide here, Kevin, one of the real values that I think can't be underestimated is this idea of not managing versions, updates, or backups. In a hosted model, we really don't have to manage backups so much, but we still are managing updates and versions. Getting rid of all that, you may not be aware of this, Kevin, but about, I think it was maybe 2 years ago, it might have been 3 years ago, CCH did a study of accounting firms, and what they found was that about 40% of a staff member's time is spent looking for information, and 35% of the time they don't find it. Now, that's sort of a broad statement, and I look at this whole idea of managing backups and versions and updates and and restoring this and all this kind of stuff is completely wasted time in an accounting firm. If I'm charging in a fixed fee model, there's no value created for that. I waste time and I become less profitable. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally agree.
So the more we can get rid of that,
work.
yeah, the more we can get rid of that, the better off we're going to be as a firm. But we have to have a strategic vision that says, hey, we want to have a firm that is going to work this way being collaborative, what I like to call collaborative accounting. All right. Kevin, let's talk a little bit. So I think we've laid some groundwork that says, the cloud is important, and I don't think we're surprising anybody with that. There's a couple of great ways to get there, hosted and QuickBooks Online. QuickBooks Online is the future. I'd like to talk a little bit about how important mobile is today to clients, Kevin. So with
Yeah.
that, um, one of the things I noticed and I don't think I missed it in 2012, but I noticed in 2013, certainly in my enterprise edition I installed the other day, is I have some mobile extension of my desktop. I don't know, given that you're in QBO, have you seen that at all?
I haven't played with the enterprise version, no.
I did install. There's a mobile, so there's a syncing that takes place between the desktop version and the cloud now, and then I can have an iPhone iPad app that I can look inside that data. So it's pretty cool. It's really extending my desktop to my mobile device, which I think is pretty cool. But I know that you're really involved with the QBO mobile side of this. So before I switch screens to you to sort of show some of the mobile stuff, Kevin, talk to us a little bit about where you see this whole mobile world going as it relates to SaaS.
Yeah, so mobile's just absolutely critical, both now and in the future. You look at this new generation of people starting businesses, and the first thing they do when they're looking for a tool to solve a problem they may be having, whether it's accounting or something completely unrelated, is they pick up their phone and they look for that tool. That is just how they think.
Yeah.
Now, if they don't find something that's going to serve their needs on that phone, then they might move online and start searching for some sort of a web service. And so more and more, we're seeing people searching for things like QuickBooks Online on their phone and then signing up that way, which is fascinating. And so that's one of the driving needs there. The reason why they're doing that is twofold. For one, they're used to finding very simple, easy to use solutions that they can understand on their mobile phone. Despite the fact that you can do the same thing on the web, people tend to think of mobile as being easier and more friendly. And two, they actually need the benefits of mobile. They want to do things on the go. They want to create that invoice while they're actually at the client talking to them. They want to categorize a couple expenses while they're waiting in line instead of doing all their work at home. You see this generation of people that are just doing little bits of work at different moments during the day instead of setting aside a couple hours to do the work at a computer at a desk.
I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, I I always want to clean my email out on my mobile device before I ever get to the office in the morning or on my way home in the evening. I mean, it's just a good example of how we want to get those little bits and pieces. I'm not going to tell you that I do it while I'm driving, Kevin, but before I start the car, right? But I want to get those little bits and pieces of information taken care of before I get home. So I think you're right on point. And there's this huge expectation that the vendors that I want to work with have a mobile solution. A good point is it took I can't remember, I think it was took forever for Marriott to get a mobile app. Starwood had one, which was Westin Hotels and those for a long time, and I travel quite a bit. I was so frustrated with the idea that Marriott didn't have one for the longest time because there was an expectation that I'd created in my mind that I should be able to do this because I'd gotten so used to making reservations on my Starwood account on my mobile phone. I didn't really log in on the computer anymore to do that. So I think it really supports what you're saying. One other
Yeah,
thing I'd like to ask you around that, Kevin, is this idea, I live in an accounting firm world, and so I usually think of myself as driving change for my clients, but I actually think that's not what's really happening nationally. I think that the consumer is driving the change. Do you agree with that? And can you talk about that a little bit?
I think these kinds of changes come from both directions. That younger generation does tend to drive change, and I think you're going to have a lot of clients that are, just demanding that they need to have a mobile solution. But I do think that the professionals drive change as well. And in the case of accountant-client relationships, you're going to have some clients that are going to wait for you to push them in that direction. They might bring it up. They might say, "Hey, I can do my Gmail on my phone. I really like that. I'd like to be able to do more things on my phone. How do I do that?" So I do see accountants playing a role facilitating that transition with a lot of existing clients.
But don't you think the accountant that is not embracing these technologies, eventually isn't the client going to be pulling them along at some
Yeah,
point?
absolutely. Yeah, they're gonna see somebody else has the cool new way to do things, and they're gonna want it.
I think that's going to be a threat to practitioners um, if they're not willing to, to invest in these spaces and to understand them and to become adept at it. I think there's a risk for those clients that want to move forward quicker, looking, for other firms. Kevin, I'm going to pass the control over to you and let you kind of show what's going on with mobile. I know you have some things around mobile, and then I think I want to have you switch then to QBO, and let's kind of take a look at some of the new things and what's happening with QBO. Does that sound okay?
Sounds good.
All right, I've just switched that over to you.
There we go.
All right.
All right, can you see my screen now?
Let me pull this back up. I can. Perfect.
Perfect. All right, so I'll just show you a couple quick mobile screenshots here so you can get the idea of what we're doing with QuickBooks Mobile. So far, what we focused on is the entire money inflow, and we've gone fairly deep with it. And so you'll notice as I go through this brief demo that I can go create new estimates, and not only can I create them, but I can add new customers to my customer list. I can add new products and services to my product and services list, etc. So I really have complete control over estimates. The same applies to invoices. I can convert my estimates to invoices when the client accepts the work. I can also do sales receipts if I'm getting paid on the spot, and I can also accept payments. And so I can really go through that entire flow. And this is what users were asking for first. They do want to be able to manage expenses on the go as well, and we're working on things like that. But they really wanted to be able to be at the client, talking about the estimate, looking around their yard if they're a landscaper, whatever they might be doing, and actually do it on the fly and then send it to them. And so if I click the Invoices button, I see a list of my current invoices. I can do some basic filtering and whatnot to look through that list and see if there's anything I need to do with that. If I see something overdue, I can actually send a reminder from here, etc. If I click into an invoice, I see the summary information about that invoice. I can, from this interface, I can send that to somebody. I can also click Edit, that little pencil at the top, and that takes me into the detailed invoice editing view. And this is very similar to what we have for estimates as well. So as you can see, I can add customers. And again, everything's connected. So if I add a customer here, I'm adding the customer to my QBO. I'm not just adding it on my mobile device. And so that new customer record that I create is going to show up on all devices for all users. I can also add new products and services items. Ultimately, I create the entire estimate here, or sorry, invoice in this case, save it, and then I can send it to the client if I'd like to.
So is the data actually going to live on your device, Kevin, or are we really just making changes to the data set in the cloud?
You're actually making changes to the data set in the cloud. And so the second I hit save here, there's a new invoice that would show up in QuickBooks Online. There's a new customer, there's new items. Whatever I did here is identical up in the cloud and therefore in QuickBooks Online.
How about getting paid for this invoice?
Yeah, so I don't have that screen here, but if I click payments here, it'll take me to a accept payment screen. I can also, once I've got an open invoice like this one, if I click that kind of curly arrow up in the right, one of the options that comes up is receive payment for this invoice.
The iPad, does it essentially use the same app, or do we see an iPad app that's separate?
We don't have a separate iPad app yet, but this does work completely on the iPad. It just it's not optimized for the size of the iPad screen, but you can do all the same actions on the iPad. We also have what they call a mobile web application, which means if you just go to quickbooksonline.intuit.com from your iPad and log in, you get a customized experience. It's not quite as slick as this one is, but you can accomplish a lot of the same things.
I've actually used both, Kevin, and they're both highly functional.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know,
they get the job done.
they do. I'm using the iPhone 5 now. I was really kind of surprised. I didn't think I was going to like the little bit bigger screen, a little bit bigger size, but I actually do. I wouldn't go back to the 4S. I've been using the iPad 3. Haven't bought the new one yet, but probably plan to. I see that size of that new iPad as being very functional out in the field for a lot of customers.
Yeah, it's handy, for walking around when you're actually on the site and adding information to an estimate and whatnot. Yeah, it's a very, very nice size for that.
Yeah, I think this is going to be really important. It's going to be important for accounting firms to understand how these solutions work so they can start educating their clients on these technologies that are available for them.
hmm hmm
So,
We've even
great.
talked to a couple accountants that have clients that are so mobile focused that this is almost all they do. They get them set up on QuickBooks Online. The client goes out in the field and invoices and collects payments and whatnot. And that's about it. They don't really have to log into QuickBooks Online that much because this covers most of their needs in some cases.
Well, once you're in the collaborative environment, Kevin, where the firm could, I mean, maybe the firm's doing payables, maybe the firm's managing the general ledger, maybe the firm's doing payroll, but the client's out in the field, you know, doing services and getting paid. So, I mean, once you move to the cloud and once you're collaborating, who does the work can be, it doesn't really matter. It could be the client, it could be the accounting firm, and you can pass those duties off because you're dealing with the same data set.
Absolutely.
To me, that's where the real value comes in. So I think what we're saying is mobile is going to be hugely important. It already is. We're already seeing that. But you see it continuing to evolve in that space, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's where we're making some of our largest investments right now.
So next step, probably let's take a look at QBO and see what's going on with that.
Yeah. Yeah, so I thought I'd start with the downloaded transactions, given that we've talked about zero data entry quite a bit. This is a relatively new feature. We released it about 6 months ago now. And for those of you that had used QBO in the past and had experienced what we used to call online banking, we completely threw that out and started from scratch on this. That had been built, many, many years ago in a world with a very different set of technologies available to us, and we felt it was time to start from scratch and do something a lot better. And so what we've done here is we've leveraged the technology we got when we acquired Mint.com to build a very easy to use and very efficient interface. And so the first thing I'll point out, it's really easy to add accounts to it. I've got one credit card added to it over here on the left. If I want to add more, I just click the add button. I search for my financial institution. Eventually it'll ask me for credentials and whatnot, and then it sets up a live connection to that financial institution. And so unlike the online banking that you might have used in desktop, I don't have to do anything to keep bringing the transactions in. QuickBooks Online automatically goes out every night and downloads all the new transactions. I can also manually click update if I wanted to update right now because I know a transaction just went through or something. But you don't need to worry about maintaining it. It's just going to download every night. Now we wanted to give people a high level of control over this flow. The number one thing we heard from both accountants and clients is that they didn't want these transactions to just be automatically added to their books. But we also wanted to make it efficient. And so we've borrowed a lot from the Mint.com UI here to create a very scannable list of transactions. As you can see, I can download or I can show as many transactions up to 100 in one screen. So I can scan this list and look for things that I might have been waiting for or watching for. The Mint.com categorization engine automatically tries to pick a category for each transaction. And I haven't doctored this data at all, so if you kind of look up and down the list here, you see some pretty decent categorization going on. It's not perfect, and in some cases they're listed as uncategorized if we don't have a good guess. But even just right out of the box, the Mint.com engine does a pretty good job of guessing at a category. Now, when the category is not quite right, it's really easy to change. I just go up here, This is actually the vendor name, and so we automatically figure out what the vendor is and create a record for that vendor if we need to. As you can see, there isn't, Amazon 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, Amazon 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, etc. There's just one Amazon. We do a really good job of figuring out the actual name of that vendor and offering up that suggestion. I can
Kevin,
also,
sorry, real quick. One of the
yeah,
things that's always been a challenge in the past is something would come in, let's use Amazon, and it would say Amazon, XYK because it was some sort of a credit card transaction or something, you know, different. This seems to do a good job of sort of renaming those to something that actually makes sense so you don't end up with a bunch of junk in your register.
that's right. Yeah, and that's all the stuff we got from Mint. They take this, let's see if this pulls up here. Huh. Sorry, the GoToMeeting just froze on my machine here.
Ah, no worry. Because you're using all those resources.
Yeah, I've seen that happen before.
What happens
Uh,
when you have a dial-up connection out there in Silicon Valley?
but yeah, if I open up this drawer, I can actually see the original text that came from the credit card, in this case, an American Express Blue card. And this one's pretty easy. You can see the word Petco there pretty clearly. But a
Okay.
lot of times this data comes in much more muddled. And Mint goes through and parses it and compares to what other people have called that transaction and whatnot, and figures out what a good name for it is and
Ah,
guesses. But again, if I pick something else here, we'll actually remember that. And then the next time we see a similar transaction, we'll do that automatically. The same thing with the category. So I can go here and choose an account for that charge, and we'll remember that choice. And then the next time you have a similar transaction, we'll apply that. Same holds true for class and location.
so the
And so
software
once
gets
I've got that all
smarter.
worked, what's that?
The software gets smarter then the more you use it, apparently.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's not just what I'm doing. What's really cool about this technology is that we're actually tuning this engine based on what all QuickBooks Online users do.
Okay.
And so if you select Petco, we'll remember Petco for you, from there on. But if you've never categorized a certain transaction before, and 95% of QBO people are categorizing it a certain way, we'll recommend that category first. And
Hmm.
so the engine just keeps getting smarter and smarter the more users and the more categorization people do.
Okay.
The other thing we do is we automatically match to existing transactions in QuickBooks. So if you look down here, this one says credit card expense to CVS for $496. And so we recognized that they had already entered a credit card expense manually into QuickBooks. And so we automatically found that match for them. And this actually gets pretty powerful. For instance, here, if I go over to match and I say find matching transactions, I can actually go in and search my books for transactions that I want to apply to that particular expense. This works great in the case where I have one expense that actually matches to a bunch of transactions. And so I can come in here, select them all, and then make them all add up to that downloaded transaction amount and sync the whole thing up.
Okay.
The last thing I'll show you here is it doesn't have to be this tedious, right? I'm kind of showing you this process where you're going through each one at a time. And what we found is that for most users, once they've tuned this engine a little bit and it understands their categorization, they can come in here, correct a couple, just click on them, change the categories, whatever they need. Then they can go up here, select all of the transactions, and click Accept Selected. And then all of those get added to their books. And so very, very easy to do things in batch once the engine is doing a good job of predicting your categorization. The last thing I'll show you is accountants love this, is that we have this accepted transactions tab. This is a great way to keep up on what your clients are doing in this interface. And so if you just want to check in on them, make sure they're doing a good job, you can see all the things that they've added to their books. If you're suspicious of one of them or you just want to see the details, you can click on it and it'll actually pull up the full transaction page in QuickBooks Online. And this is where you can go to actually add more detail if you wanted to go deeper than what we allow in the downloaded transactions page.
If I wanted to change it, I assume I could change it there as well.
Exactly. Yeah, you can change it here, or you can go back to downloaded transactions. And if you're in accepted, you can select one and you can just say undo. And that'll go back into unaccepted transactions, and then you can do whatever you want with it. And so if somebody's come in here and really made a mess, like we've seen people come in and assign the entire group to other or something, you can come in here, select them all, undo them, and then do them correctly.
Okay. So this interface here, Kevin, is so significantly superior to what I had seen in the past. This is you guys did a great improvement with this one.
Thanks. Yeah, we had a great team working on this one.
The other thing that I really liked in QBO is the concept of a money bar.
Yeah.
Are you in a position to show me that?
Yeah, I can. I want to make sure we have time for the QuickBooks Online for Accountants demo.
Geez.
I'm
sorry about that. Just real quick.
I can do this real quick. Yeah. So this is a pretty cool interface. This just came out about 3 months ago. And this is one that I don't know if it'll hold up on GoToMeeting, but I really like to show off how fast QBO performs here. You might not be able to see this on GoToMeeting, but when I click on these categories, look how quickly this list is filtering. It's just almost instantaneous. It feels much like a desktop product. And so what this does is it consolidates all of my income transactions into one big list. As you can see, this scrolls. I can actually show up to 300 transactions at a time here. And a couple of things that are neat about it. One is it creates this sort of fun game for your clients to play to try to move things from left to right. So this is unbilled stuff over here. I've got my estimates, moving them to invoices, and then finally moving them to paid. It gives them a very simple visual representation of how their accounting actually works and helps them understand it very quickly. And a lot of them report that it actually makes it fun for them. And so these actually serve as filters. And so if I want to go look at my overdue invoices, for instance, I can click on overdue. It's going to filter it down just to those guys. I can then do a batch action on it. So I can select all the overdue invoices, click batch actions, and then send reminders for all those transactions with one click. The last thing I'll show you here is that it also helps reduce errors in workflow. And so I hear from a lot of accountants that their users tend to skip the receive payment step and just go right to deposit. And something nice about this is that it shows each transaction with the next logical action to the right. And so it makes it very hard for me to skip this step, because if I want to do something with this invoice, my only option is to receive the payment, or to do a couple other things like resend or print the transaction. But you'll notice that we don't make receive deposit an option here because we don't want them to go do that. Yeah. So that's the money bar.
Kevin, I was enjoying it so much I almost forgot about Woody. So we need to bring. Why don't you go ahead and transfer over to Woody? And while we're doing that, Woody's going to talk to us a little bit about QuickBooks Online Accountant, which is now out of beta, and people are using it. I've been using it for quite some time, but there's some nice features in here. Woody, so I'm going to turn it over to you and let you kind of explain what we're looking at.
Oh, you bet. And I was still kind of chuckling, Darren, about your Silicon Valley dial-up connection joke. That was nice.
I went right over Kevin's head.
It did. He did not. He didn't even. I don't think he heard it. So I was still laughing a little.
I'm freezing my Mac.
So I love what Kevin showed on, and he explained when you guys are talking about investment in the online, and we're not leaving the desktop, of course, but investing in the online, and we have some great features. And if accountants or people haven't seen QBO in a while, I mean, it's radically different, even over the last year, or even 6 months, let's say. But still, we needed to have something for the accountants, right? I mean, you'd agree. You guys are very used to your accountant edition and the different tools you have there that save time and steps. Absolutely. And so for an accountant that, either never really liked QBO or always really wanted to, like you had said, Darren, the online accountant, which is more of just kind of a portal into your client's QBO files, really they should come back and take another look. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And right now, you guys are seeing my screen okay?
Yep.
All right, so here's my client list, and speaking of which, QBOA was in pilot. Today it actually went commercial, but it is of no cost to pro advisors or even someone that's not a pro advisor that even has one QBO client. QuickBooks Online Accountant is of no cost to you, so it's still that kind of free accountant user, if you will. So in my QuickBooks Online Accountant, which you guys are using now, we're looking at now, and I'm in Internet Explorer 9. I do prefer Chrome for it. It works in Firefox as well, but I want to show some navigation things. But here's my client list. And I log in with a certain user ID to my QuickBooks Online accountant, and that's that same user ID I access my QBO client file. So this is why I have all of these clients here. And I can see the newest functionality, like I can learn more about what Kevin had just gone over about downloaded transactions, and of course the QuickBooks Mobile, which, like Darren, you said, does work with desktop, but I agree with Kevin, it's much of a slicker sync with QBO. There's no sync to set up. That's kind of what I love about the QB Mobile with QuickBooks Online. And we'll add more things to here, but I can also look at the address or information or edit this window. It will not affect the information on my client's QuickBooks Online file. And then you would just click on the link, for the file you want to be in, and it'll open up to an accountant center. And Kevin, I would be remiss if I didn't mention this. We were talking about it earlier. It's not like some other file or the data is like I'm getting into an accountant's copy or backup or portable. I'm actually in my client's QuickBooks Online file, whether they have Simple Start, Essentials, or Plus. But I'm in it with an accountant-specific lens. And so if you guys can probably even see that accountant menu up there, the menu tab, right, with all that information there. And you have an accountant center. So I know, Darren, in 12 and 13, in your QuickBooks accountant, you have your accountant center. So it is a similar it looks different, but it's still similar in theory. Everything with a green star are tools that are not standard to QBO and should save the accountant who's going in to either do cleanup or just verify things or work in the file, save them time and steps. So it's similar in theory to what we did with the QuickBooks Desktop Accountant Edition over years, because it was never that full of stuff back in the early 2000s, right? That we started adding that stuff even the last 3 or 4 years. So that's a similar path that QBO's on, having something for the accountant. Now, right away, you're probably thinking, well, what about navigation, right? Open window list, stuff like that. Even though you can do Control New, depending on the browser, but from this Accountant Center, we'll drill into a couple of these tools quickly. I got about 6 minutes here. But I can click New Window. And what I like about IE9, Firefox, or especially with Chrome, is that I could have, in this window, I could go to, let me go back here and go to Reconcile. And in QBOA, if you guys ever tried to undo a reconciliation in regular QBO, you're going into the register and unchecking, all the clear transactions, which is more of a manual undo. Well, in QuickBooks Online Accountant, I can actually see this kind of historical reconciliation window, undo it, it'll undo all the subsequent ones, but leave the, interest and charges and service charges just like you'd be undoing the last rec in Pro, right? Oh. And I can drill in on changes or when they force the adjustment. So this is very helpful here, but on the next window or tab, I could have, like a register open or some type of report. And if I'm using dual monitors, which I know all of you guys are, especially if you're members of the RootWorks, but I know most people are using dual, maybe even triple monitors, you can pull the tab off and move it onto the other monitor. And so I can, that really works, and you can put it right back in to your thing here, the browser tab. So that ability is there, and when you just click Account, it opens up a new window too. So you have the ability for multiple windows. So I showed you the Reconcile. How about some of the client data review tools that you're used to? Just like in Accountant, right? Desktop, you can click Reclassify Transactions. And
my favorite one.
Yeah, right. I remember in Indianapolis, I just kind of blown by CDR mentioned, you're like, hold on, let's ask, my members if they use it, and a couple of people raised their hands, just even in the desktop.
Most people don't know it's there even in the desktop because they don't realize it only shows up in the Accountant Edition.
Right.
It's really important.
No, exactly. So this would save, like Darren does, and most of a lot of his members, right? So they save time, and this is probably, I agree with you, this is probably the most popular of the CDR tools. So we pulled it over to QBOA. You have the ability you can check off all of them or some of the checks, and you can, just like you do in client data review, you can go down and choose the account and the class, even if you want to just start class tracking. So that is there, as well as write off invoices in a batch is also another one. Those are the two we pulled in from client data review. But you guys are also going to rely on a Premier report, which is voided deleted transactions report. That's going to be helpful as well as a couple comparison reports, the journal entry, which I definitely wanted to show you guys, and show you a particular one and ask Darren what is unusual about this journal entry versus a journal entry in the desktop.
I'm looking.
The hint is under the account column.
Under the account column. The number of lines?
And more than one ARAP.
Ah, good
journal
point.
entry. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Sorry,
yeah, we have AR and AP.
I didn't mean to throw you under the bus with that.
No, that's awesome.
You'll have to get me after this, but
I was looking for aesthetics.
right. So, and that's just standard of QBO. So a lot of people don't know that in QuickBooks Online, you can do more than one AREP per journal entry, which has just always been a limitation. I think it's a #2 request since 1992, honestly, for desktop. But you can make an adjusting journal entry, and it'll correlate to an adjusting journal entry report, you know, that you would also have had in desktop. So we have these tools, and I wanted to mention, I always forget this one, this date range here at the top of the Accountant Center. When I set that, all of my reports and tools will open pointing to that date range, so you don't have to change it with each tool you run. And then we also have added some widgets, you know, for reconciliation. You can see this one's not complete, so I already know right away I have some work to do in this file. And there's some tips here, particularly multiple windows, multiple companies. If you're in Chrome, you create more than one Chrome user. In Google Chrome, you can actually have one company file up in QBO on one monitor and the other one up on the other monitor.
Awesome.
So, you know, the navigation tips are many, and I find that a lot of accountants who even want to come to QBO aren't sure. We're just trying to evangelize, look, there's a lot of cool navigation that you can do in QBO that you cannot do in desktop. Like I cannot put a register on one monitor, you know, and have the reconcile window on another. It'll lock you to that one frame you're looking at. QBO, you could do that.
So, Woody, before we run out of time, one of the things I wanted to ask you guys, Kevin, you know I'm never shy about asking for new improvements and things like that. So one of the things as we move off of, let's even say hosted, I start setting my clients up in QBOA. You know, one of the things I want to be able to do in the future is set a client up myself really easily and allow other people in my firm to be able to see and use those. You know, I'm not asking you for anything other than, does that make sense?
Oh, yeah. Are you asking Kevin or me? Kevin?
Well, maybe Kevin.
Yeah, Kevin.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That makes perfect sense.
So, as you know, I think what accountants need to do is get in and start using QBOA, get used to it, and it's only going to get better. And the tools that are going to be provided to us, I think it's going to get better as well. Would you agree with that, Kevin?
Absolutely. You know, and as always, click that yellow feedback widget in the top of the screen there. I didn't demo that, but we read that feedback voraciously, and so we're making huge investments in all these products right now, and the more feedback you can give us, the more we can serve your needs. So yeah, be sure to tell us what you want.
Well, I think that our listeners today, guys, can certainly see that there's been significant improvements in QBO as well as QBOA. So with that, guys, thank you very much for your time. I know we're out of time. It's 3 o'clock Eastern time, which is my time. So thank you guys very much. I want to thank our attendees for joining us as well.
Thanks for having us, Darren.
Yeah,
all right, guys.
Good stuff.
All right, thanks so much, guys. I'll talk to you soon. Thanks everybody for attending.